Geeks and gentlemen, boys and girls, and seekers of comic book knowledge the world over. I'm Chuck Dixon, and I'm here to answer your questions about what it is I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. And trust me, I enjoy every minute, as I enjoy the time spent with you, dear reader or subscriber or liker or first-time viewer. All are welcome. Big Tent here. Okay, let's get to the first question. McCran Comics. You said before that you picture the comic pages in your head as you write. Do you picture the images in the panels as being actual people and places, akin to movie stills? Or do you picture it as artwork? If you picture artwork, do you imagine it drawn by the artist you're working with, or by a favorite artist like Heath, Ditko, Nolan, etc.? Do the images you picture move? That's a fascinating question. It really is. Yeah, I don't picture them as people or photographs or stills. I picture them as comic art. And I can, once I'm done the page, I can kind of see the page in my head as I build it. Mostly I know, do I want a 6-panel grid? Do I want a large establishment panel at the top with other panels at the bottom? Do I want a splash with insets? What do I see the page as? And that's how I describe it to the artist. Now, whether or not they draw it to those exact specifications simply doesn't matter to me. I'm taking the pictures that are in my head and trying to put them in the artist's head. And how they interpret them is up to the artist. And I welcome that. I like that. Surprise. I mean, I've never seen a page drawn the way I described it, and that's fine with me. But I need that image in my head to understand basically how much real estate I have to deal with on the page. So years ago, when I first started, and often I didn't know who was going to be drawing something. I didn't know what artist would be assigned to it. And so my default in my head was Joe Kubert. I would picture Joe Kubert, which ain't bad because Joe was a truly cinematic storyteller. I mean, even before a lot of people. If you look at a lot of what Frank Miller does, there's a lot of Joe Kubert there. I've never seen Frank Miller do anything that Joe Kubert hadn't already done years before. Sergeant Rock or Firehair or, Tor or one of the many, 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 many titles Joe Kubert has worked on over the years. So as far as dynamism and perfect panel construction and things like that, you can't go wrong having Joe Kubert in your head. Now, over the years, as I got more and more into the business, I would often know who was going to be drawing it. If Tom Grummett was with me on Robin for a long run, or Graham Nolan was with me, or Rodolfo DiMaggio, or if it was Flint Henry, I would know to write to their strengths, which they have many strengths, but I wanted to make sure I got the best out of them. I wrote stories that they wanted to draw that were interesting and not too terribly demanding. You don't want to write in a whole bunch of crowd scenes. You don't want to, as I did early in my career, write a extended motorcycle chase on board a freight ship. I didn't think until the artist told me how difficult that was to reference. So I never did that again. So yeah, I pictured in my head as comics and generally as the artist who will be drawing it. And there's exceptions. I mentioned Flint Henry. I would write for Flint, but I had no freaking idea what he was going to do with it. I mean, he would just go nuts. And I like that. He brought 110%. He brought all the mojo he had to every page. And I love it. I speak in past tense because sadly Flint just doesn't draw anymore. Or if he does, he's keeping it a secret from me. So I know you're listening, Flint. So anyway, and then there were other guys like Scott McDaniel who I felt I was restraining by doing a lot of panel layouts or suggested page layouts. So on almost every action scene you'll see in our Nightwing run, it was left up to Scott to choreograph those action scenes entirely. I would basically just give him some of the dialogue, the location, where the scene had to begin and where the scene had to end, and he just went for it. So it was like, the next 5 pages are yours, Scott. Go crazy. And the results were magnificent. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, but yeah, I suggest to any comic book writer, learn to picture those pages in your head. If you have to, draw the panels out. You don't have to draw the art, but just draw the size of the panels you're imagining out so you can tell how much room you've got on the page. Because so often I see writers dominate the page with verbiage, whereas if they understood how a comic book page is constructed, they probably would have let the artist do a little bit more of that storytelling. A little bit more cinema in the storytelling than yak, yak, yakety, yak, yak. Hey, it's a McCran Comics Twin Spin. And let's go with his next question, which is a good one, but it's a lengthy one. It seems to me, it's not only a question, it's a little bit of a mini editorial, which is fine with me. It's very well, you'll see, it's very well worded. I like the way you think, McCran. It seems to me a likely outcome of the mainstream industry limping along is for DC and Marvel to become licensing houses instead of publishers. Do you feel that this is a likely direction? I can't see them continuing to pump out subpar books at a loss indefinitely. And I don't think they just close up shop because someone at WB or Disney must recognize the value of the IPs. If memory serves, IDW has already produced some official Spidey or Cap comics. Is that the future for comics featuring these legacy characters? In the event that an independent party licenses a character you've worked on, Batman, Punisher, etc., and reached out to you about writing more comics, picking up where your runs left off, would you be interested, or have you moved on creatively? Yeah, it's I think that's where it's going. I've often said in these videos that it's kind of inevitable that these characters, these companies, their intellectual property will be offered up as licensing to other publishers, much the same way they're licensed for clothing and toys and bed linens and jewelry and whatever the hell else these characters show up on. So we've already kind of seen it happening with, as you said, IDW licensing the stuff out. And because now if Marvel was still a wholly owned subsidiary of itself, still not privately held, but still a company without an overseer, DC as well, they would probably fight harder for their survival. But because they are a part of a larger media conglomerate, Disney and Warner's, I guess they hired people for whom there was less of an instinct for that company to survive. Back in the day, Stan Lee fought hard for Marvel to survive. Jeanette Kahn fought hard for DC to thrive. Paul Levitz fought hard for the integrity of DC Comics and to keep it an ongoing concern. These days, I think the executives or people running these companies hope that maybe the big daddy or big mommy company that owns them will hire them someday, and they'll get a real job in film production or TV production or something else that pays better than comics. Dream on. But I think that's kind of what they were hoping for. Like, if I totally gut this little comic book company I'm running to make it more profitable for the parent company, maybe they'll see that and be happy and, make me a king. But as we see, it's just a failing proposition. And really the only thing keeping DC and Marvel as publishing entities afloat are the licensing money that they receive. But those have shrunk over the years. I don't know the situation at Marvel, but I suspect it to be true that Marvel does not get as big a chunk of the Marvel movies and TV shows as they might, because Disney controls net receipts. Now, toy licensing and things like that, things that Marvel goes after, I assume, on its own, they're going to make decent coin on, and that keeps the doors open. DC Comics, same situation. And I know in reality, I know for an absolute fact that DC renegotiated net receipts with Warner. So DC is getting far less of the pie from movies and TV shows, even as they become more and more profitable. And so there's less money to go around there. And so DC, I think, primarily has to survive on receipts from games, toys, Lego, clothing, whatever else they can sell these characters pictures on, whatever tchotchkes they can move. And it's less and less and less and less about the comics. It's less and less and less about the quality. It's less about earnings. It's not a publishing house anymore. Neither DC or Marvel are primarily publishing houses. If they were, they're enormous failures. And so I see the day where, hopefully, the parent company will realize that, they're being, they're dragging around a loss leader. They're dragging around a company that seems indifferent to its own survival and indifferent to what happens to the characters. And yes, these characters are worth a fortune. At these comic book companies, these characters are worth billions of dollars in worldwide trade, in merchandising and all the rest of it. So yeah, they're going to want to preserve them. And one would hope that Warner's and Disney will come to the realization that the movies and the TV shows are not the be-all, end-all. They are not the driving engine, although more and more it seems like they think they are. But eventually they're going to realize that there's some value in keeping a creative stream going, but no value in having an in-house publishing company. So I can see DC and Marvel, in particular DC, turned into a licensing house, much like the licensing houses that control things like Lone Ranger and Lassie and the Three Stooges and things like that. And there would be a ready market for publishers, and these days with crowdfunding, even individuals, to license these characters and go to town. And just law of averages, just law of the jungle. That what these individuals and smaller companies would turn out would be better than what the majors are doing. I think there'll be a lot more creative freedom. And by freedom, I mean real freedom. There'll be a lot more diversity. By that, I mean real diversity. And it would just be a better game all around. It'd be better for comic fans. We actually have some, Superman and Spider-Man, the rest, comics that we'd actually want to read. Now I understand some people are doing good work, but overall, DC and Marvel's output is pretty sad for a multitude of reasons I won't go into here. But yeah, this is now. Would I go back? If someone said, "Hey, we've got Nightwing, and we're going to reunite you with Scott McDaniel," yeah, it would be a draw. I would be tempted. I might even say yes. But at this point, I have moved on creatively. I moved on creatively quite a while ago, and I'm real busy with all my own stuff, which I own. I own or co-own, with my collaborators, and I'm into bigger stuff. So. I'd rather make my own luck than sit here waiting for the phone to ring, which, you could wait forever. I don't want to be given permission to write. I don't want to be told what to write anymore. And, but, if some independent publisher with the cojones to hire me and bring me back in on things I've written before, yeah, I'd probably say yes, especially if I was reunited with, or united for the first time with artists that I really wanted to work with. So anyway, it's an open question. But a related question, Eric Morin asks, James Gunn has announced his slate of movie and TV shows. What do you think about what's coming up? Well, it kind of looks like a mixed bag to me. There's some stuff. I got to wonder if Gunn's proposed list is for real. Is it a wish list? Are these things actually going to be put on a schedule? It seems like an ambitious list. Seems like a lot of stuff. It seems like he's going to be writing a lot of it. I mean, if he writes all the things he says he's going to write, he's not going to be leaving the house anytime soon. But I got to wonder, is this just a pie in the sky? Is this just a wish list? Some of the things seem extremely underwhelming. Some of the things seem to exist only to check boxes. Quite frankly, I don't care. I know you don't want to hear that, but I don't care. I've never seen a DC-based movie that I've liked, ever. And I don't think I'll ever see one. And now that they've moved far, far away from the source material, I really just have no interest. And one of the problems for me, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. The choice of Gunn to basically be the basket they put all their eggs in, I don't understand it given his track record. Yes, he had enormous success with Guardians of the Galaxy. But if you look over the rest of the films he's been involved with, it's like, it's okay. I mean, they earned money. They weren't blockbusters. They weren't huge. Really, the only big thing he was involved with was the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. And while I find a lot of his stuff entertaining, over time, you kind of see the notes coming. I'm kind of familiar with his repertoire, and I don't see how that's going to translate to DC, and I don't understand why in an industry like entertainment, where everything is about conservation of risk, you would hand over everything to one guy. Now, I understand there's other films that are in production that he won't be involved with, but the idea, as I see it, is that once all of those films are finished and released, everything coming out of DC in movies and television is going to be all Gunn all the time. And I just don't see how you can take a slate like that and have any hits. There's no diversity of thought or approach. Everything is going to be seen through the lens of one guy, and I don't think, for some reason, I don't think James Gunn is a Louis B. Mayer. I don't think he knows what the audience wants. And the other thing that I find perplexing is that so much of this new material is going to be based on relatively new comics that appeared within the last, decade or so. And these are not core basic DC properties or DC stories. These are like recent reboot, reiterations, reimaginings that, and that's fine, except they're not comics that sold particularly well. They weren't record breakers. They may have been among the best-selling things at DC, but that's kind of like saying, this turtle came in first in the turtle race. It's not, it's not going back to the classic material. It's also not going back to material I think was going to find a universal audience. So for me, it's both concerning and I don't care. I really don't care. And there's going to be more on DC later in this very episode. So on to lighter stuff. Glenn Davis says, I just got issue 300 of Knights of the Dinner Table. Are you familiar with this series? Why do you think it's been able to last this long? Knights of the Dinner Table, yeah, I'm aware of it. I've never read an issue. I don't think I've even thumbed through an issue. Of course, I'm aware of it. It's been around forever. And my understanding is it's about a bunch of friends who play role-playing games and their adventures in life. And one has to assume it has a loyal following. It must have a loyal fan base that makes it worth doing. I don't know what the creators or the publisher or whatever have gone through, but I see it every month or every other month in solicitations. When I go to order my comics, I always see Knights of the Dinner Table. I know people who read it religiously and really dig it, really enjoy it, and that's great. That's really cool. And I imagine, it has to at least break even, right? So maybe the people that write and draw it have day jobs. I don't know. You can't assume anything. Maybe these guys have made a fortune off of this. I hope they did. Because this kind of dedication should be rewarded. Maybe they just do it out of the love of it, and as long as it just breaks even, they're cool with it. But now I'm curious. Now I want to pick some up. Are there collections? I don't know. I didn't even look that far into this. But yeah, I mean, you gotta. I've never read one, but I'm all in favor of it. I hope they go to issue 600. But there's, a few comics out there like that. I mean, Eric Larson, keeps putting out Savage Dragon. It's last I heard. And obviously a labor of love. It can't sell that well, but he has a loyal fan base. And I assume he's breaking even on these issues. I hope he is. I wish the best for anybody who creates something like this and continues creating it out of love for the stuff they're doing. So it's probably I have done the same thing. I've worked on comics that I didn't even get paid for just because I wanted to create. Any of the work of mine you see on ArcTunes, I've yet to see a dime from, but I had the opportunity to create. Now the rewards will come from ancillary stuff, and yeah, there is some outside deals being done with things that I own that I've worked on at ArcTunes, but that was the reason. This was a content creator, an imagination engine that I got to work on. My artists get paid. I don't, but that's fine with me because I just want to do it. And it's a break-even prospect for me at the moment. So I dig it. I like when people create for the love of creating. Tim Gilpin. With your upcoming Conan book trilogy, I'm curious about your opinions on the 3 Conan movies, the 80s Schwarzenegger films and the 2011 reboot starring Jason Momoa. I really got to rewatch the first Schwarzenegger film. I remember that visually it was cool. John Milius would seem at first glance to be the perfect writer-director for this stuff. Milius is a terrific filmmaker. I just felt, I remember watching it and was, effects were not up to what they are now, obviously. And the comedy relief stuff I didn't get because there's not a lot of laughs in Robert E. Howard, but the comedy relief characters didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But man, it looked good. It looked awful good. And the music score was terrific. And I thought What's-Her-Face was a great Valeria. I can't remember the actress's name. She's a dancer. And she was a terrific Valeria. It's funny because I met Schwarzenegger right after he was casted for this. I was working at a TV station as a janitor. And Schwarzenegger was going to be a guest on a morning show called Dialing for Dollars, which is just as cheesy as it sounds. But Arnold was there to promote a new fitness book. And if you've ever seen Arnold sell, Arnold is a salesman. First and foremost, his biggest muscles are pitching and selling and hawking goods. So that was what he was there to do. And he kindly spent about 20 minutes with me in the green room telling me all about Conan and how he hoped that John Milius would be the director. And he read some treatments. And he read all the comic books, and he read the novels, and he really liked them. And we talked about Conan a whole bunch, and how he was already preparing for the role, even though he was months away from principal photography. Now, the second Conan movie it's like take the worst Conan comic ever written, one of those Conan comics written by one of those indifferent writers who was just writing it for a paycheck, and put it on the screen, and that's what you get. This was awful, absolutely awful. It was disappointing because the director was Richard Fleischer, who directed the Kirk Douglas classic Vikings movie. He should have been a perfect choice, but this was just a bad movie all the way around. Just insult your intelligence. And sadly, this one, I guess, killed the franchise because it way under-earned what they thought a sequel to Conan the Barbarian should have earned. Now, I've frankly never seen this Conan flick. Momoa seems to be perfect. He's a big guy, taller than Schwarzenegger, actually, and looks good. I've just never watched it. I should watch. I'll tell you what. This weekend, I'm gonna rewatch Conan the Barbarian, both versions. I'm gonna rewatch the '82 and the 2011. just for you. And okay, the less said about the TV show, the better. Ace Mowick, since you favor the Western genre, what do you think of Mobius's Blueberry series or other Westerns by European comic professionals? I'm a fan of Blueberry. I bought a lot of them back in the 70s in French because they weren't in English. They wouldn't be translated into English for a long time. So mostly I just looked at them because they were very difficult to follow, not just because they were in French, but because there's a lot of talking scenes. There was a lot of exposition. And so you weren't quite sure why everybody was doing what they were doing in these stories, which I thought was a little odd because Western stories to me should have the sparest storytelling of all. A Western story should be as arid and lonesome and desolate as the landscape. And but these stories had a lot of people sitting around card tables talking and sitting on stagecoaches and talking, riding long distances and talking. So I really couldn't read them. Once I got to read them in English, Marvel did some terrific editions through Epic with translations, I believe, helped along by Archie Goodwin. He sort of helped colloquialize the translations, something I've done for foreign publishers. And I found out what I believed was true. They while beautiful, some terrific sequences, they're largely too talky for me. There's action, but there's not enough action. Things don't seem to be driven by action. The action scenes are more interludes than true action set pieces that carry the story forward. But beautiful to look at. I look at my collection a lot because they're terrific. A French series I like a lot better is McCoy, which I've never gotten to read in English. It's drawn by Palacios, a Spanish artist, and McCoy is a Confederate, sometimes shown in the Civil War, sometimes shown after the Civil War, mostly the Civil War in the West along the Mexican border, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, places like that. And as you can see, the artwork is freaking gorgeous. And there's lots and lots of action. And unfortunately, I've never been able to read them, but I understand the stories because there's not a lot of exposition. We learn about the characters by what they do, and I can actually understand what I'm reading or guessing at what I'm reading, and I can understand it. And you should take a look. There's some relatively inexpensive collections where they collect 3 or 4 of these albums into one big fat hardcover. I think there's 3 hardcovers that cover the whole series, and they're just beautifully done. And I like his feel for authentic period costuming and settings and all the rest. And of course, there's always Lucky Luke, the absolute classic cowboy. So fast, he's faster than his own shadow. These are a lot of fun, and recently I reviewed some new versions of Lucky Luke that are perhaps more grounded in reality, less of a Western satire, more of a classic Western adventure. And those are terrific too. I hope they continue because I'm really, really enjoying them. This new, it's not a new version of Lucky Luke. It's like a new take, but it doesn't change anything about Lucky Luke. It sort of just embellishes and recasts the character in a slightly different atmosphere or tone. And of course, I've said over and over again, greatest Western comic book character ever is Tex Willer out of Italy. Long-running Italian classic from Benelli. And I've reviewed a lot of these, and some of these Tex volumes you can get from Epicenter Comics, and they're worth looking at. They're just big honking hardcovers, 300-400 pages long, full of terrific stories, mostly by Mauro Boselli and some of the greatest artists in Italy. Now, another one I enjoy is Sauvage. It's a French comic. It's by Jan, the guy who writes every French comic I love. And it's set during the Maximilian period in Mexico. You have French Foreign Legion versus Juaristas, and the action is these stories are like McCoy, easy to follow, even though they never appear in English. And I've read, I think there's 5 of them, and they're all fantastic. The art is great. The action is moves right along. The characters are vivid. The settings and costuming and all the rest of it. Excellent stuff. The best Western comics in the world will always be from Europe. I'm sorry. I love Jonah Hex. I love a lot of the stuff done here in the United States, but it just doesn't hold a candle to what they've done in Europe over the years. There's many European Western comic series that are worth checking out. Hassan Rogers, what are your thoughts on character work being completely changed or undermined by writers when they take over a title? And which characters do you think had it worse that you had to work with? Well, that list goes on forever and ever and ever. They've done some terrible, horrible stuff to existing characters. Changing everything about them. From basically emasculating the Punisher to toying around with long established characters' sexual preferences and personalities and all the rest of it. And I guess these people just don't like heroes. They don't like to write heroes. They don't like the traditional values that characters like Batman and Spider-Man and Captain America represent. So they have to undermine them in some way. And they just write comics that make us sad. And of course, we all are aware that, the woke aspects, the box checking in modern comics that's gone on forever. And it just seems to be a thumb in the eye to fans as well as casual readers of comics, that they keep coming up with these stunts to alter the characters beyond all recognition, so that the general public no longer recognizes who these characters are. And, it's hard to say which characters had it worse, because I think the worst is yet to come, because they just don't seem to give up on this idea of having stories about their comics go viral while the sales of the comics continue to plummet. But worse than all of that, I think, is the dissolution of, or the dilution of these main characters by adding all these different iterations and versions of all these different characters. They take away what was special about the original character. And while it's fun to reimagine, Spider-Man or Batman or Sergeant Fury or whatever character you choose, it's fun to reimagine. I think that should stay in the realm of fan fiction. And, because at some point you're going to confuse fans. It's like, okay, which Spider-Man is your favorite? Eventually you've got Spider-Man competing against himself or herself or they self. And it's not good for sales. I can't imagine being a new reader to comics and not knowing which version of the character am I reading. Am I reading the one meant for general audiences? Am I reading the one only meant for adults? Am I reading the one based on a movie, which is different from the TV show, which is different from the movie that came before it? Which, you see what I mean. Even if you're a dedicated fan, you got to get lost every now and again. And offering everybody too many choices, it's like a dessert tray. You're going to, eat way too much creme brulee. And while the cheesecake goes bad, you know what I mean? You're diluting your sales, is what I'm saying, as well as diluting the character. I don't understand it. Stay with what works. And if what works doesn't work, find a way to make it work. Find a way to reinvent it. And that's the problem overall, is because there used to be a turnover in comics audience. That hasn't happened in over 30 years. There's been no turnover. So they keep doing things to keep the interest of the core fan base, which is shrinking. It's shrinking because people don't like what they're doing and they walk away. It's shrinking because it's aging out. Eventually, it's going to shrink because the people who buy every issue, they can't live forever. And we're talking about fans that are in their 40s, 50s now, and you're going to lose people, and it's obvious they have lost people. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because Nothing new has been created. I mean, I've been in comics, interested in comics long enough to see new iterations every few years, because back in the day, they were like, well, sales are starting to fall. We got to, we got to pump some life into this character or this franchise to bring in new readers. And I look forward to those changes. I saw Batman go from sort of Chester Gould, Dick Tracy look to Carmine Infantino, to Neil Adams, to Frank Miller, and then I got to work on it. So but we don't see those changes anymore. And so, in order to present the illusion of change, they just create 19 different versions. I mean, how many different Batmans are there? How many different Supermans? How many different Spider-Mans? It's too much. And I think that's more dangerous than altering the characters, is multiplying the characters. Augie Cruz, what did you think of DC Comics suing Chris Wozniak on a Batman story that made it in the movies? If you don't know the story of Chris Wozniak, it's fascinating. And I'll say as much as I can, because I don't want to get sued by anybody. Not Chris. He wouldn't sue me. But Chris Wozniak, back in the 90s, I believe, handed in a pitch for a Riddler story in which he portrayed the Riddler, basically rebooted the Riddler as a serial killer and who plagues Batman. And the story relied a lot on Batman's detective skills in order to thwart this new version of the Riddler. And he handed it over to someone at DC. I should say someone connected to DC. Sometimes it was sometimes collaborator with DC. I'm not going to say their name. And that person, said, "Oh yeah, that's nice." The way your mom would say that's nice before she put your crayon drawing up on the refrigerator door. And, I think they glad-handed Chris along, because that's kind of what was going on at DC back in the day. They sort of glad-handed you along. Yeah, we're still looking at that. Yeah, we might do something with that. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. We'll go to lunch and talk about it. Nothing would happen. And then down the road, they made a movie. The Batman, the most recent one with Robert Pattinson. And the question was, did Matt Reeves steal the Batman script? Well, I don't think Matt Reeves, I don't believe he stole the Batman script. I think he, knowing the people involved, knowing the person involved, I believe that Matt Reeves, I don't know anything about Matt Reeves, but I believe that Matt Reeves was given this pitch as the idea of this unnamed person in question, the person who Chris Wozniak handed the story over to. And I think, knowing what I know, I think this person represented Chris Wozniak's script as his own. Basically, he took Chris's name off it, put his own on it, and said, "Look, this is a great idea I have for the Riddler." And he sold it to Warner's. He sold it to, and Matt Reeves, got to work from this basic outline that is very, very, very much like Chris Wozniak's outline. Now, Chris has, I understand, all of the stuff he needs for his lawsuit. See, he sued them first over the use of this story. And he's got all of the paperwork and communications and everything else. He can prove when he handed this in, what it was, and all of the points. Now, see, when you go into a case like this, you have to have a certain number of points. I forget how many points of similarity. So you can prove, yeah, this wasn't a coincidence. They took this story from me and used it without giving me credit or money or anything else. And all Chris is suing for, and he should be suing for millions, but all he's suing for is what he would have been paid for the story if they had been honest with him. That's all he's asking for, which is a drop in the bucket of like the $1.5 billion global box office this movie earned. Okay, and if I were him, I'm sure he is, he's asking for the piece he would have entitled. He would have been entitled to a piece of the net, which of course they can hide. He'll end up with nothing, but he should at least get, the 100,000 or more that he would have been paid if they had been honest with him from the beginning. Now, the problem is he's not up against DC's lawyers. He's up against Warner's lawyers. And Warner's lawyers I think they sleep in coffins. And Warner's has armies of lawyers who are simply hanging on hooks like coats, and they pull them down when they need them. Warner's doesn't go out and hire lawyers. They have them in a kennel, and they sick them on you. And I've dealt with them, and they're aggravating. They'll make you nuts if you let them get to you, and they'll just drag things out. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Chris sues DC, and basically they sue him back, saying you had no right to write a Batman story. Here he's got proof. I wrote this Batman story in 1990, whatever. And you had no right to write that story. He said, well, it's not a story. It's a movie treatment. It's a pitch. It's a this. It's a that. You don't have a right to write a Batman story. What about all the fan fiction writers writing Batman stories? What about all the fan-made videos of Batman you can see on YouTube? What about all the pitches that I wrote that were never, greenlit? I wrote a lot of pitches for Batman projects that never went anywhere. Am I in trouble because I wrote an unsolicited or unauthorized story of Batman? I mean, you could sit down tonight and write a story about Batman. Is Warner's going to sue you for that? If you didn't make any money off it, if you didn't try to produce it, if you didn't present it as your own character. I mean, this is so stupid, but it's not stupid because this is what Warner lawyers and all big company entertainment lawyers do is they waste time. And if you've ever hired a lawyer, you know that time is a lot of money. It's big time. These lawyers get hourly rate. Every time they answer the phone, it costs you money. Okay? So they're hoping to wear Chris down. I think Chris has a contingency lawyer. I hope and pray he has a contingency lawyer who's not asking for any money up front. So he can see this through because he has a case. And just the fact that Warner's countersued him is like proof, absolute proof that they know he did this story. They're admitting, yes, you handed the story in the 1990s and we turned it into this movie. And how dare you? How dare you write a Batman story and then let us steal it? I mean, it's ludicrous on the face of it. But this is what they do. Their other tactic is to pretend they don't understand what you're talking about. You can come to an agreement with them on the phone. And then when the papers are to go be signed, they pretend they didn't understand anything that was said on the phone. Like, oh, we didn't talk about this. Yeah, we did talk about this, jackass. It's right here. We have it recorded. But see, every moment of that back and forth, and I don't get it. This who's on first routine they do is supposed to cost the plaintiff money, and that's their tactic. So I really hope Chris has a contingency lawyer so he can just hammer and tong them until they finally have to give him some damn money. Pay the man his $2 for God's sake. I mean, you can probably lift up the sofa cushions or look under the refrigerator at the Warner offices and find the money that Chris wants. It's only fair. Now, as far as the guy that he handed the script to, I mean, this guy is so infamous in Hollywood, he has a nickname that everybody knows. And I tell you the nickname, except it's a play on his own name. So I can't tell you the nick. I don't want to get sued. I don't want trouble with somebody that, has lawyers hanging by hooks. But I had my own personal experiences with this guy. He was working at a comic book company that I was working for. And at one point, he called a meeting. Now, he was only connected to the company because of his supposed Hollywood connections. He was supposed to basically get us intros into the studios, which he didn't really do a very good job at. He managed to get a movie produced, but it wasn't one of ours, and one of the worst movies ever made. Maybe you're starting to guess who I'm talking about. Anyway, he called all the writers at the company into a meeting of his own. And he sat down and he said, such and such a TV network is looking for an hour-long action drama. Any ideas? And the writers start pitching him ideas. And he's writing them down on a legal pad. And I'm silent, right? And finally he says to me, don't you have any ideas? You've always got ideas. And I said, yeah, but I get paid for them. I said, what's the deal here? Is the company we're all currently working for involved with this TV project? And he says, well, not at the moment. I said, then why are we having this discussion? I said, you are trolling for ideas, and we have no guarantees. We have signed no papers. We have seen no proof of anything. You're writing down pitch ideas that our names very well may not go on. These pitch ideas might be presented as your ideas. And who's to say, because we're at a meeting, nothing's being recorded except for what you're writing on the pad. And I basically said, I'm out of here. I pushed my chair away from the conference table and left. And he sent someone after me saying it was important for me to come back. And my answer is not fit for, mixed company. So I've had a history with this guy doing exactly what he did to Chris Wozniak. And so I'm on Team Chris, and you should be too. If you're any kind of advocate for creator rights, you should be interested in this case, because I'm anxious to see the outcome. I'm hoping and praying that it has an undisclosed outcome, that neither side can talk about what the settlement amounted to, because those settlements are always huge, the ones you can't talk about. So, because the studios do not want anybody to know that they got taken for big bucks. So stick in there, Chris. You've got an awful lot of comic fans and an awful lot of freelancers and co-creators behind you on this one. Josh Reed. Let's talk about something lighter, like World War II. You seem like a man who enjoys history. Who is your favorite World War II general? If you ever got to write a story, fiction or nonfiction, about a World War II general, who would you choose? Come on, Patton. Everything about Patton was cool. He was a badass. He was a true badass. Helped chase Pancho Villa around Mexico. In World War I, was in the trenches, often alone. A lot of people don't realize Patton got lost behind German lines on his own for several days, and he was an exterminating son of a bitch. I mean, he challenged Mexican bandits to gunfights, just like in an old Western, because he was a big fan of Westerns, Western novels, and dime novels. And and in World War II, again, a badass, old blood and guts. And, definitely the most outrageous character that we had going on the Allied side. And, successful field commander. He drove the Third Army into Nazi Germany like a stake through the heart, and could have taken Berlin if he wasn't told to hold back, because it was important for the powers that be that the Russians take Berlin, not the United States. But Patton could have, him and the Third Army could have won the war on their own. Not to take anything away from the Russians, because they certainly wore the German army down. They certainly broke the back of the German army. But Patton was poised to, whatever. I don't want to get too deep into history. Obviously, I like history. So, just a cool guy with a lot of, weird mystical aspects. His belief in the fact that he was reincarnated. His association with Civil War generals through his family. He was able to, as a child, sit, at the dinner table and listen to people like Mosby tell stories about cavalry raids on Union rail depots and things like that. Just a fascinating character, and probably the one I would want to write about. I have a high concept pitch for a Patton story if I can find an artist who will draw it, and I will do it someday. But I'm not going to tell you here because it's high concept. And as we see from the last question, things can get stolen. High concept ideas are routinely ripped off. And I want to get credit for this one. Another great general is Kurtis E. LeMay. He was the Patton of the Air Force. He was another dude who did things his own way. He invented saturation bombing. He invented the close formation bombing the B-17s did. I mean, he again was himself a badass. I mean, he would pilot missions himself, even though he was a general. He flew B-17s, he flew B-29s. He successfully set up the campaigns that crippled German industries in World War II, supported the Normandy landing, and then they shifted him before the war in Europe was over to the Pacific to plan the saturation bombing of Japan leading up to the atomic bombings. So a true hard ass who is often misquoted as saying that he would, if were he in charge, he would bomb North Vietnam into the Stone Age. What he said was that we have the capability to bomb North Vietnam into the Stone Age, which is a difference, not just a distinction in what he said. That we could do it, not suggesting that we do it. And one of the reasons I like LeMay is he was one of my dad's commanding officers when my dad was in the 8th Air Force out of England. My dad flew 24 combat missions over Europe and as a bombardier, and won a commendation from the United States Army Air Corps for suggesting changes to this very top secret Norden bomb site. He suggested mechanical changes to it that made it more accurate, quite a few percentages more accurate and easier to use. And my dad was a high school dropout, mechanical genius, but a high school dropout. And he suggested these changes, and for that he was awarded by the bigwigs in the Army Air Corps. So there's your little bit of history. There's some legal stuff, a little bit of everything this week, huh? A bit of controversy. I'm sure I'm going to hear crap from somebody on some of the things I said. And if you want to give me some crap, you can contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to reach me with your questions, suggestions, whatever, threats, pictures of your doggies and kitties, whatever you want to, let's have a conversation. A lot of you know from communicating with me here, sometimes I can't answer these questions in a public forum like this, but I'll give you a reply. I'll always try to give you a reply. And while I got you, this collection of Avalon, is 300-page hardcover, is available through Amazon. It's also available through Arcade and Comics if you want to go that route. And it is it's my superhero epic based in the alt hero universe. As I said, it's 300 pages. It's $29.95. I think that's a pretty darn good deal. And tons and tons of action the way you like it. And lots of twists and turns. It's the story that if you've been reading it on Arctoons, this is the one you've been reading, but this is complete. Arctoons were serializing it, but we haven't come anywhere near the end of the story. And it is one big honkin' superhero epic from beginning to end. And I hope you check it out. So anyway, that's it for me. I want to thank you for listening, subscribing, liking, all the things you do, all these awesome questions, awesome replies, terrific conversations we've had through the email and on the Facebook and on the Twitter and all that jazz. And I will see all of you, I hope every single one of you, down the road.